So let's kind of now tie this all together for a totally different type of athlete that most people aren't thinking about, right? Which is the centenarian athlete. And I'm not assuming that we're starting from the standpoint of having been world-class Olympic cross-country skiers in our 20s who never stop. I'm talking about somebody who's in their 40s who, I don't know, kind of has the epiphany that says, wait a minute, like, it's cool to be a power lifter. It's cool to be a weightlifter. It's cool to be a CrossFitter, a strongman, an elite runner, cyclist, swimmer, whatever. But I'm going to pick a different sport. I'm going to pick a sport where the optimization is around my ability to be as physically robust as possible in the last decade of my life, which, means I want to be able to do a bunch of things that most people can't even fathom when they're, 80 or 90 years old.
Yep.
That means, like, I can run up an escalator if it's broken carrying my luggage. I can put the 25-pound bag in the overhead compartment of the airplane. I can pick a grandchild up out of a crib. I can play on the floor and stand up on my own. No issues, right? I can go for a hike on rocky terrain and I'm not going to slip and fall. Again, things that you would do blindfolded today, but the number of people in the last decade of their life that can do this, you can count on a few hands. So I'm going to argue that to train for that, you have to make trade-offs, right? One of the biggest trade-offs you have to make is optimizing against getting injured, because the compounding effect of training is so strong that it's rivaled only by the compounding effect of not training. In other words,
correct.
Yeah, you know exactly what I'm saying, but for the listener, you will lose it way faster than you will gain it. And therefore, you could argue rule number one of what I'm proposing is you can't ever stop training. To have an injury that sidelines you for 3 months is an unacceptable risk, even if the concessions you make for that cost you some peak performance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so armed with all of those caveats, what would we beg, borrow, and steal from each of these phenotypes into our centenarian decathlon?
So we're going to work backwards, which is physiology first. So you have 3 things you need to train. And if you train those 3 things, you can steal from any of those areas that you'd like to get those 3 things done. And you can mix and match, and I would argue you should. So thing 1 is you have to have high quality functioning muscle tissue. Okay. Number 2, nervous system. And by that, in large part, when we typically think about the nervous system for exercise, we often think peripheral. I'm even talking central and vis-a-vis the brain. Okay. And then 4, cardiopulmonary. Sorry, 3, cardiopulmonary. So we need to make sure that we got muscle. We need to make sure that our motor control is very, very astute. And then we need to make sure that our cardiopulmonary system is high functioning. You do all 3 of those things, you're going to be able to do all those activities you talked about a second ago. The distinction of the brain is very, very important, because if you were to go to a sport like powerlifting, the downside is, while there's a lot of neural activation required for peak force, the lack of variation and the lack of range of motion is a problem. One of the things that is become very clear, preserving brain health. I'm not sure, actually, there's a recent paper by my friend. Do you know Tommy Wood?
I do know Tommy Wood very well, and I've been meaning to have Tommy on the podcast. I need to get him on the podcast.
Oh, Tommy would smash.
Yeah.
Did you see his paper on late onset
Yes.
dementia?
Yep.
Super clear, in my opinion, that one of the key components to maintaining brain function throughout life is proprioceptive innervation. And so you need to be moving in space and learning your study. So if you think about this from the exercise perspective, if the octogenarian, the 100-year-old, 90-year-old, you need to have some physical activity that is uncontrolled. And by uncontrolled, you don't want to be moving up and down same foot positions all the time. This could be an outdoor hike where we're engaging with the environment, plus the steps are non-uniform, terrain is slippy, whatever. It could be a sport, could be surfing, could be badminton, it could be anything else, but you need one physical activity in your plan that requires you to react to the world. Strongman probably checks that box a little bit. Probably a lot, right? Maybe not maximally, but a lot. Weightlifting checks that box pretty well. Olympic weightlifting. Running, sprinting, checks the box decently, right? You're moving, especially if you can kind of over. And so you can kind of walk through the rest of them. Cycling, probably wouldn't check that list very well, right? So we want to think about that. That's the first thing. That's what's needed. The second thing that's needed then is high force production, right? So you preserve your nerves by asking them to do a lot of different things, Tommy's paper, and by asking all the motor units to work. So something throughout your week has to be high force production. And by high force production, I'm going to say greater than 80% of your max. That could be powerlifting, could be weightlifting, could be strongman, could be CrossFit. No problem. Could be any of those things. Could be different plyometrics and stuff like that. All right, nervous system is checked, those two components. Cardiovascular system, I think the cardiovascular system needs to be able to do two primary things. Maybe we'll call it three. I'll split it into three. It needs to be able to sustain consistent work output over a minimum of 30 minutes with no interval, like no break back down. Call this zone whatever, I don't care. But this is no break whatsoever, okay? Weightlifting does not check that. Powerlifting does not check that. Strongman, maybe, but you're probably going to be taking some breaks. CrossFit might be able to get away with it. You might be able to do a 25-minute workout with almost no dip, but you may actually need to integrate more classic steady state stuff here. This might be an air bike. This might be a sled push. This might be a jog, a swim, it's like something like that. So that's one component the cardiovascular system has. The other one is it has to be able to get the max heart rate. You got to get all the way up there, right? So CrossFit, absolutely. Strongman, absolutely. Powerlifting, kind of. If you're going heavy enough, you'll get up there. You can get blood pressures of 450 over 350 during a 1 rep max deadlift. You can get complete occlusion, basically. But probably not the place I'm starting for my max heart rate training.
And how many times a week do we think a person needs to experience their max heart rate? For this athlete,
for the average
again,
person,
yeah, not talking about a real athlete. That is just once a week of hitting that max heart rate.
Yeah, it takes the systemic fatigue out of it. I would love two. Two would be really, really good. If you can really handle it, if the allostatic load's low, 3 would be fine, but I'd say minimum 1, most people shoot for 2. I think that's great. I would say the same thing for the steady state piece. 1's good. 2 might be better. It depends on what you're doing. Like if you're also doing a lot of like long just walking and things like, you might hedge your bets there a little bit. And then the third one, maybe in this category, is recovery from high intensity stuff. So not only just be able to get your heart rate up high once, being able to come back down, regulate yourself, come back up, regulate yourself back down. And that could be certainly done with CrossFit, certainly done with strongman, maybe done with a few other things. But that's kind of where we're at there. So if we were to kind of go back to the beginning, 1 day a week playing some uncontrolled thing. 1 day a week's got to be really high force. 1 day a week's got to be max heart rate. 1 day a week's got to be sustained heart rate. Those could all also be combined. There's no reason why you can't go in, do 10 minutes of pure strength training, check that box, and then go play some pickleball. Check that box. You could do, max strength stuff for 10 minutes, and then go do a CrossFit, a 20-minute AMRAP. Great. So it doesn't have to be like 100 days. We could do this whole thing in 40 minutes. Easy. So we do those two things. We've checked off cardiovascular health. We've checked off neuromuscular or neurological health. Then the third one is muscle health. And the muscle needs to be able to do a handful of things. It needs to be sufficiently strong, which we sort of already talked about. It needs to be of sufficient size. Okay, now we don't need to be excessively large, but there is some minimum requirement we have to have as we age.
Do you think about that from the standpoint of like ALMI, where you really want to see somebody above? I mean, we hold patients to a very high standard. We want our patients above the 75th percentile for ALMI. You see a big step up in mortality benefit above that. How do you quantify that for folks?
So you can look at that. Depends on how much data you can get on that. FFMI is also like crudely okay.
Sure.
Like if you get into the above average or higher, I'm good. Yeah.
But is it literally something as crude as FFMI and ALMI as an anthropometric measurement of size?
I think it's totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah, what you're going to see generally is a tighter line between strength,
Yes.
like then you will see size
Yep.
as you move up. We probably are out of time, but there's a whole discussion. The whole idea that like too much muscle mass is detrimental to your health at age is like a giant misnomer.
Yeah.